Chapter 25. The next day, toward 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a carriage drawn by two magnificent English horses stopped before the Count of Monte Cristo's door. In it was a man wearing a blue coat with silk buttons of the same color, brown trousers, and a white vest crossed by an enormous gold chain. His hair was so black and hung down so far over his forehead that it hardly seemed natural, for it was completely out of keeping with the deep wrinkles it failed to conceal. He was, in short, a man of 50 or 55 who tried to appear 40. Putting his head through the window of his carriage, he sent his groom to ask whether the Count of Monte Cristo was at home. The groom knocked on the porter's window and asked, "Is this the Count of Monte Cristo's residence?" "His Excellency lives here, but he's engaged now," replied the porter. "In that case, here's the card of my master, Baron Danglars. Please take it to the Count of Monte Cristo and tell him that the Baron stopped on his way to the chamber in order to have the honor of seeing him. I don't speak to his Excellency, but his valet will deliver the message." The groom returned to the carriage and reported the answer he had just been given. "He must be a prince, then, this man they call his Excellency, and to whom no one but his valet has the right to speak," said Danglars. "But that's all right. Since he has a credit opened with me, he'll have to see me when he needs money." He sat back in his carriage and called out to the coachman, so loudly that he could be heard on the other side of the street, "To the Chamber of Deputies!" Monte Cristo, who had been notified of the Baron's visit in time to see him, had been studying him from behind a window blind with the aid of a pair of powerful binoculars. "Ali," he called out, striking a copper gong. Ali appeared. "Call Bertuccio," said Monte Cristo. Bertuccio entered at almost the same moment. "Did your Excellency wish to see me?" he asked. "Yes. Did you see the horses that stopped in front of my door just now?" "Certainly, your Excellency. They're extremely handsome horses." "Why is it," said Monte Cristo, frowning, "that when I've asked you to get me the two finest horses in Paris, there are two horses in Paris as handsome as mine, and yet they're not in my stable?" On seeing the Count's frown and hearing the stern intonation of his voice, Ali bowed his head. "It's not your fault, Ali," said the Count in Arabic, with a gentleness which one would not have expected to find either in his voice or in his face. "You know nothing about English horses." Ali's features took on their look of serenity once again. "Your Excellency," said Bertuccio, "the horses you mentioned weren't for sale." Monte Cristo shrugged and said, "Don't you know that anything is for sale to a man who's willing to pay the price?" "Monsieur Danglars paid 16,000 francs for them, sir." "Well, then, you should have offered him 32,000. He's a banker, and a banker would never miss a chance to double his capital." "Are you speaking seriously, sir?" asked Bertuccio. Monte Cristo looked at him as though astonished that he should ask such a question. "I have a call to make at 5 o'clock this afternoon," he said. "I wish to have those horses harnessed to my carriage and waiting for me by then." "May I point out to your Excellency that it's now 2 o'clock?" said Bertuccio timidly. "I know," was Monte Cristo's only reply. At 5 o'clock, the Count struck his gong 3 times. 1 stroke was for Ali, 2 for Baptistin, and 3 for Bertuccio. The steward entered. "My horses," said Monte Cristo. "They're harnessed to your carriage, sir." The Count went outside and saw the horses he had admired in front of Danglars' carriage 3 hours earlier. "They're really handsome horses," he said. "You were right to buy them, although you were a little late." "I had great difficulty getting them, sir," said Bertuccio, "and I had to pay a very high price for them." "Are they any less handsome because of that?" asked the Count, shrugging his shoulders. Bertuccio turned to go away. "Wait," said Monte Cristo, stopping him. "I need an estate on the sea-coast, in Normandy, for example, between Le Havre and Boulogne. It must have a small harbor, which my corvette can enter. She draws only 15 feet of water. The ship must always be ready to put to sea, no matter what hour of the day or night I give the order. Make inquiries about an estate, and when you hear of one, go see it. If you're satisfied with it, buy it in your own name. The corvette is on her way to Fécamp now, isn't she? I saw her put to sea the same evening we left Marseille." "And the yacht?" "She's at Marty." "Very well. Correspond with the 2 captains from time to time to make sure they don't go to sleep." The Count climbed into his carriage and ordered his coachman to drive him to the residence of Baron Danglars. The Baron's white and gold salon was well known on the Rue de la Chaussée-Antin. It was there that he had his visitor shown on his arrival in order to dazzle him right from the start. "Have I the honor of addressing Monsieur de Monte Cristo?" asked the Baron when he entered. "And have I the honor of addressing Baron Danglars, Chevalier of the Legion of Honor and member of the Chamber of Deputies?" The Count was repeating the titles he had read on the Baron's card. Danglars felt the thrust and bit his lip. "I've received a letter from the firm of Thompson and French," said Danglars, "but I must admit that its meaning isn't very clear to me. In fact, I came to your house today to ask you to explain it to me." "I'm listening, and I'll be glad to help you." "I have the letter right here," said Danglars, drawing it from his pocket. "It opens an unlimited credit for you with my firm." "Well, Baron, what's obscure about that?" "Nothing but the word unlimited." "Do you think the firm of Thompson and French isn't perfectly reliable?" asked Monte Cristo as naively as he could. "Oh, perfectly reliable," replied Danglars with an almost mocking smile. "But in financial matters, the word unlimited is so vague. Vagueness is doubtfulness, and the wise man will stay away from doubtful things. Let me try to make myself clear by asking you to name the sum you expect to draw on me. The reason I opened an unlimited credit with you is precisely that I don't know how much money I'll need." The banker leaned back in his chair with a heavy, arrogant smile and said, "Oh, don't be afraid to ask. You may be sure that my funds, limited though they may be, are sufficient to meet the highest demands. And even if you were to ask for $1,000,000—" "Pardon?" "I said $1,000,000, repeated Danglars with all the self-assurance of stupidity. "But what good would $1,000,000 do me?" said the count. "If I needed only $1,000,000, I wouldn't have bothered opening a credit for such a trifling sum. Why, I always carry at least that much with me." So saying, he drew from his card case, 2 treasury bonds for 500,000 francs each. A man like Danglars must be bludgeoned, not merely pricked, and this blow had its effect. He stared at Monte Cristo in a daze. "Come now, admit that you mistrust the firm of Thompson and French," continued the count. "I allowed for that possibility, and although I don't know much about business, I took my precautions. Here are 2 other letters like the one that was sent to you. One is from the firm of Arstein and Escels of Vienna, opening an unlimited credit for me with Baron de Rothschild. The other is from Baring of London, and it is addressed to Monsieur Lafitte." This was the coup de grace. Danglars was vanquished. He opened the 2 letters with trembling hands and verified the signatures with a scrupulousness which would have been insulting to Monte Cristo if he had not been aware of the banker's bewilderment. "Here are 3 signatures which are worth many millions," said Danglars, standing up as though to pay tribute to the power of gold personified in the man sitting before him. "3 unlimited credits! Excuse me, Count, but while I am no longer mistrustful, I'm still astonished." "Well then," said Monte Cristo, "now that we understand each other, now that there's no longer any mistrust between us, shall we fix an appropriate sum for the first year, say 6,000,000, for example?" "Very well, 6,000,000, said Danglars hoarsely. The count stood up. "I must confess one thing to you, Count," said Danglars. "I thought I was rather well acquainted with all the large fortunes of Europe, yet yours was completely unknown to me. Is it of recent date?" "No, on the contrary, it's very old. It's a sort of family treasure, which was forbidden to touch, and which was tripled by the accumulation of interest. The period fixed by the testator expired only a few years ago, so your ignorance was quite natural. You'll learn more about it in a short time." He accompanied these words with one of those pale smiles which had so frightened Franz d'Épinay. "Yes, that will be for later, when we know each other better," said Danglars. "For today, I'll content myself with presenting you to Madame Danglars. Excuse my eagerness, Count, but a client like you is almost part of the family." Monte Cristo bowed as a sign that he accepted the honor. Danglars rang, and a servant appeared. "Is the Baroness at home?" asked Danglars. "Yes, sir." "Is she alone?" "No, Madame has company." "And who is Madame's company? Monsieur Debray?" asked Danglars with a joviality that made Monte Cristo smile inwardly, for he was already acquainted with the banker's transparent family secrets. "Yes, sir, it's Monsieur Debray," replied the servant. Danglars nodded. Turning to Monte Cristo, he said, "Monsieur Debray is an old friend of ours and is secretary to the Minister of the Interior. As for my wife, she lowered herself by marrying me, for she comes from an ancient family. She was Mademoiselle de Sèvres, and later a widow of the Marquis of Nargonne." "I haven't had the honor of meeting Madame Danglars, but I've already met Monsieur Lucien Debray." "Where was that?" "At Monsieur Albert de Morcerf's house." "Ah, you know the young Viscount." "We were together in Rome during the Carnival." "Oh, yes, I think I heard some strange adventure of his with bandits, some sort of miraculous escape. I believe he told my wife and daughter about it when he returned from Italy." "The Baroness awaits you, gentlemen," said the servant, entering the room once again. "Allow me to show you the way," said Danglars to the Count of Monte Cristo. Madame Danglars, whose beauty was still outstanding despite her 36 years, was at her piano while Lucien Debray sat looking through an album. Debray had already had time to tell the Baroness quite a number of things about the Count. Her curiosity, aroused by both Albert's stories and the new details brought to her by Lucian, was now at its height. She therefore received her husband with a smile, which was contrary to her custom, and gave the Count a ceremonious yet gracious bow. Debray exchanged a semi-familiar greeting with the Count and an intimate one with Danglars. "Allow me to introduce the Count of Monte Cristo," said Danglars. "I will say only one thing about him which will make him a great favorite of our fair ladies. He has come to Paris with the intention of staying here for a year and spending 6,000,000 francs during that time, which means that we may expect a series of balls, dinners, and supper parties." "You've chosen a very bad time to come here," said Madame Danglars. "Paris is detestable in summer. There are no balls, receptions, or banquets. The Italian opera is in London, and the French opera is everywhere except in Paris. Our only entertainment consists of a few wretched horse races at the Champ de Mars and Sattery. Do you like horses, Count?" "I've spent a good part of my life in the Orient, madam, and as you know, the Orientals appreciate only two things in this world, the nobility of horses and the beauty of women." Just then, Madame Danglars' confidential maid entered and whispered a few words into the mistress's ear. The Baroness turned pale and said, "Impossible!" Then turning to her husband, she said, "Is what my maid tells me true?" "What has she told you?" asked Danglars, visibly agitated. "She says that when my coachman went to harness my horses to my carriage, he found that they weren't in the stable. May I ask what that means?" "Listen to me," said Danglars. "Oh, I'll listen to you, because I'm very curious to hear what you're going to tell me. I'll ask these gentlemen to be our judges, and I'll begin by telling them the facts. Gentlemen, Baron Danglars has 10 horses in his stable. 2 of them are mine. They're magnificent horses, the finest in Paris. You know them, Monsieur Debray, my dappled grays. Just now, when I'm about to lend my carriage to Madame de Villefort to go to the Bois de Boulogne tomorrow, these 2 horses are nowhere to be found. Monsieur Danglars has no doubt managed to make a few thousand francs on them and sold them. Oh, what abominable breed these speculators are!" "My dear, those horses were too spirited," said Danglars. "They were only 4 years old, and they made me terribly frightened for your sake. I'll find you other horses like them, even finer, if there are any, but they'll be calm, gentle horses which won't inspire me with such terror." The Baroness shrugged her shoulders with an air of profound contempt. "My God!" exclaimed Debray. "Unless I'm mistaken, I see your horses harnessed to the Count's carriage." "My dappled grays!" cried Madame Danglars. She rushed over to the window. "Yes, they're mine!" Danglars was dumbfounded. "Can it be possible?" said the Count, affecting astonishment. Danglars said nothing. He foresaw a disastrous scene in the very near future. Debray, who also felt the storm approaching, left on some invented pretext. Monte Cristo, who did not wish to spoil his advantage by remaining too long on this occasion, bowed to Madame Danglars and withdrew, abandoning the Baron to his wife's anger. "Very good," thought the Count as he left. "I've accomplished my aim. The Danglars' domestic peace is now in my hands, and I'm about to win the gratitude of both the Baron and the Baroness in one stroke. I would have liked to be introduced to Mademoiselle Eugénie Danglars, but we have ample time ahead of us, and that can wait till later." With this reflection, he climbed into his carriage and returned home. 2 hours later, Madame Danglars received a charming letter from the Count of Monte Cristo in which he stated that, not wishing to make his entrance into Paris society by distressing a pretty woman, he would be grateful to her if she would take back her horses, which he had sent to her along with the letter. They were wearing the same harness she had seen on them that morning, except that the Count had had a diamond inserted in each one of the rosettes they wore on their ears. Danglars also received a letter in which the Count asked his permission to satisfy a millionaire's whim and begged him to excuse the Oriental manner in which he had sent back the horses. That evening, Monte Cristo went to his country house at Auteuil, accompanied by Ali. The next afternoon, Ali, summoned by the gong, entered the Count's study. "Ali," said Monte Cristo, "I understand you're very skillful in throwing the lasso. Is that right?" Ali nodded and drew himself up proudly. "Good. Could you stop an ox with a lasso?" Ali nodded. "A tiger?" Another nod. "A lion?" Ali pretended to throw a lasso and imitated a choked roar. "I understand. Have you hunted lions?" Ali nodded proudly. "But could you stop 2 runaway horses?" Ali smiled. "Very well then, listen. A short time from now, a carriage will pass by drawn by 2 runaway dappled gray horses, the same ones I had yesterday. Even at the risk of being trampled, you must stop them in front of my door." Ali went out into the street and traced a line on the pavement in front of the door. Then he came back inside and pointed out the line to the Count, who had been watching him. The Count tapped Ali gently on the shoulder. It was his way of thanking him. The Nubian went outside, sat down in front of the house, and began to smoke his chibouque. Suddenly, a distant but rapidly approaching rumble was heard. Then a carriage appeared. The coachman was vainly trying to stop the horses, which were running wildly at a tremendous speed. Inside the carriage, a young woman and an 8-year-old boy were clinging to each other, so terror-stricken that they were unable even to utter a cry. A stone under a wheel or a low-hanging tree would have been enough to cause the carriage to be smashed. Ali set down his chibouque, drew a lasso from his pocket, threw it, caught the front legs of the left-hand horse, and let himself be dragged along for 3 or 4 steps. But at the end of those 3 or 4 steps, the horse fell, preventing the other horse from continuing its wild race. The coachman leaped down from his seat, but Ali had already seized the second horse by the nostrils in an iron grip, and neighing in pain, it sank down beside its companion. All this was done in the time it takes for a bullet to hit its mark. It was nevertheless long enough for a man to dart out of the house in front of which the accident occurred, followed by several of his servants. As soon as the coachman opened the door of the carriage, this man lifted out the lady, who was clutching a pillow with one hand and pressing her fainting son to her bosom with the other. Monte Cristo carried them both into his house and set them down on a divan. "You're safe now, madam," he said. The woman pointed to her son with a look that was more eloquent than any entreaty. The child was still unconscious. "Yes, madam, I understand," said the count, examining the boy. "But there's no cause for alarm. He hasn't been injured in any way. He only fainted from fear." "Oh, don't tell me that just to reassure me. Look how pale he is. Oh, my son, my child, my Edward. Speak to your mother. Please, sir, send for a doctor. I'll give my entire fortune to anyone who can bring back my son to me." Monte Cristo opened a small chest, drew out a flask containing a blood-red liquid, and allowed a single drop of it to fall between the child's lips. Although still pale, the boy opened his eyes almost immediately. On seeing this, his mother became almost delirious with joy. "Where am I?" she cried, "and to whom do I owe so much happiness after such a cruel ordeal?" "Madam," said Monte Cristo, "you're in the house of a man who considers himself lucky to have the opportunity of sparing you pain." "It was all because of my cursed curiosity," said the lady. "Everyone in Paris is speaking of Madame Danglars' magnificent horses, and I was foolish enough to want to try them." "What?" exclaimed the count in admirably feigned surprise. "Do those horses belong to the Baroness?" "Yes, do you know her?" "I've had the honor of meeting her, and I'm doubly glad to have saved you from the danger in which those horses placed you, because you might have attributed it to me. I bought those horses from the Baron yesterday, but the Baroness seemed so grieved at having lost them that I sent them back to her in the same day." "Then you must be the Count of Monte Cristo whom Hermione spoke to me about yesterday." "Yes, I am, madam, and I'm Madame Heloise de Villefort." The count bowed as though he had just heard a name that was completely unknown to him. "Oh, how grateful Monsieur de Villefort will be," said Heloise. "You've saved his son and his wife at the same time. If it hadn't been for your courageous servant, this dear child and I would have both been killed. I do hope you'll allow me to give that man a reward worthy of his devotion." "Please don't spoil Ali for me, madam," said Monte Cristo. "Ali is my slave. In saving your life, he served me, and it's his duty to serve me." "But he risked his life," said Madame de Villefort. "I once saved that life, madam. It therefore belongs to me." Madame de Villefort was silent. Perhaps she was thinking about this man who made such a deep impression on everyone who saw him. During this moment of silence, Monte Cristo examined the child, whose mother was covering him with kisses. He was small and thin, and had the pallor which usually goes with red-haired children, yet his rounded forehead was covered with a forest of rebellious black hair, which, falling down to his shoulders and framing his face, doubled the vivacity of his eyes, which were full of sly malice and childish wickedness. His first movement was to shake himself free of his mother's embrace and open the small chest from which the count had taken the flask containing the red liquid. With the air of a child who is accustomed to satisfying all his whims, he began to uncork different bottles without asking anyone's permission. "Don't touch that, my boy," said the count sharply. "Some of those liquids are dangerous, not only to taste, but even to inhale." Madame de Villefort turned pale and pulled her son back to her. When her fear had passed, she cast a short but expressive glance at the chest. "Is this your usual residence, Count?" she said, standing up. "No, madam. It's only a sort of pied-à-terre in the country. I live at 30 Avenue de Champs-Élysées, but I see you're completely recovered and ready to go. I'll have those same horses harnessed to my carriage, and Ali will have the honor of driving you home while your coachman remains here to repair your carriage. When he's finished, I'll have it taken directly to Madame Danglars by a team of my horses. But I'd be afraid to go with those horses again. "Oh, you'll see, madam," said Monte Cristo. "In Ali's hands they'll be as gentle as lambs." Indeed, Ali had just approached the horses holding a sponge soaked in aromatic vinegar, which he then rubbed their nostrils and wiped away the foam and sweat that covered their foreheads. Then he harnessed them to the Count's carriage and climbed up onto the seat. To the great astonishment of the onlookers, who had seen the horses running as though they were carried along by a whirlwind, he was obliged to use the whip on them to get them to start, and even then they went at such a slow trot that it took nearly 2 hours to reach Madame de Villefort's home in Faubourg Saint-Honoré. Chapter 26. That same evening, Monsieur de Villefort put on a black coat and white gloves, got into his carriage, and alighted at 30 Avenue de Champs-Élysées. If the Count of Monte Cristo had lived in Paris society longer, he would have appreciated Monsieur de Villefort's visit at its full worth. Monsieur de Villefort was not only a magistrate, he was almost a diplomat, and he paid very few visits. He gave a ball once a year and appeared at it for only 15 minutes. He never went to the theater, the concert hall, or any other public place. Sometimes, but rarely, he would play a game of whist, while careful to choose only partners worthy of him, an ambassador perhaps, a prince, or an archbishop. Such was the man whose carriage drew up before Monte Cristo's door. The valet announced Monsieur de Villefort just as the Count, leaning over a large map, was tracing out an itinerary from St. Petersburg to China. The public prosecutor entered with the same stately, measured tread with which he had entered the courtroom. "Count," he said, "the outstanding service you rendered my wife and son today has made it my duty to thank you. I have therefore come to carry out that duty and express my deepest gratitude to you." As he spoke these words, the magistrate's face lost none of its usual arrogance, and his neck and shoulders retained the inflexible stiffness which made his flatterers describe him as a living statue of the law. "I'm very happy to have been able to save a mother's son for her," replied Monte Cristo with icy coldness, "for maternal love is said to be the most sacred of all sentiments, and this happiness on my part dispensed you from a duty whose performance honors me. To be sure, for I know that Monsieur de Villefort is not prodigal with the honor he does me, but however precious it may be, it is worth less to me than my inner satisfaction." Villefort, astonished at this unexpected reply, started like a soldier who feels himself pierced beneath his armor, and a slight movement of his disdainful lip indicated that he did not consider the Count of Monte Cristo to be a very civil gentleman. He looked around for something which might serve as a pretext for changing the subject of the conversation. Seeing the map which Monte Cristo had been examining, he said, "Are you interested in geography, Count? It's a rewarding study, especially for a man who, like you, according to what I've been told at least, has seen every country represented on that map." "Yes," replied the Count. "I've made a psychological study of every human species on the assumption that it would then be easier to go from the whole to the part rather than beginning with the part and going to the whole." "Ah, so you're a philosopher," said Villefort after a moment of silence, during which, like an athlete meeting a formidable adversary, he had gathered his strength. "Well, Count, if I were like you and had nothing to do, I can assure you I'd find a less gloomy occupation." "It's true," said Monte Cristo, that man is a very ugly creature when one examines him closely. But you just remarked that I had nothing to do. Do you think you have something to do, Monsieur de Villefort? Or, to speak more clearly, do you think that what you do is worth being called something?" Villefort's astonishment doubled at this second thrust delivered so vigorously by this strange adversary. "Your eyes are fixed only on one social organization of humanity," continued Monte Cristo. "You see nothing but the springs of the machine, and not the sublime workman who makes it function. You recognize around you only those whose positions have been assigned to them by some minister or king. You are unable to see those men whom God has placed above kings and ministers by giving them a mission to fulfill rather than a position to occupy." "And do you regard yourself as one of those extraordinary beings?" asked Villefort, more and more astonished and unable to decide whether the man to whom he was speaking was inspired or mad. "Yes, I'm one of them," said Monte Cristo coldly, "and I don't believe any other man has ever found himself in a position like mine. The domains of kings are limited by natural barriers or changes of customs or language. My kingdom is as large as the world, for I am neither Italian, French, Hindu, American, or Spanish. I am a cosmopolite. I adopt all customs and I speak all languages. You think I'm French because I speak French with the same ease and correctness as you, but Ali, my Nubian, thinks I'm an Arab. Bertuccio, my steward, thinks I'm a Roman. Haiti, my slave, thinks I'm a Greek. Therefore, since I am from no country, since I ask no government for protection, and since I regard no man as my brother, I am not deterred by any of the scruples or obstacles that paralyze the efforts of the weak. I have only 3 adversaries. The first 2 are distance and time, but with persistence I am able to overcome them. The third one is the most terrible, the fact that I am mortal. Only that can stop me before I reach my goal. Unless I die, I will always be what I am. That is why I tell you things you have never heard before, even from the lips of a king, for kings have need of you, and other men are afraid of you. Who has not said to himself, in a society as ridiculously organized as ours, someday I may have to go before the public prosecutor? But even you can say that to yourself, Count, for as long as you live in France, you must naturally submit yourself to French law. I know that, Monsieur de Villefort, but when I enter a country I study by my own methods all the men who may be either advantageous or disadvantageous to me, and I come to know them as well as they know themselves, or perhaps better. The result of this is that any public prosecutor with whom I might have to deal would find himself in a much more difficult situation than I. In other words, said Villefort hesitantly, human nature is weak, and all men, according to you, have committed errors. Yes, either errors or crimes. And you alone are perfect? No, I'm not perfect, replied the Count, only impenetrable. I maintain my pride in the face of men, but I abandon it before God, who drew me out of nothingness to make me what I am. I admire you, Count, said Villefort. And if you are really strong, really superior, and really either perfect or impenetrable, which, as you rightly say, comes to almost the same thing, then I can only say to you, be proud and masterful. That's the law of domination. You must at least have some ambition or another. Yes, I have one. What is it? As it happens to every man at least once in his life, I was once raised by Satan to the top of the highest mountain on earth. From there he showed me the whole world and said to me, as he said to Christ, Son of man, what wouldst thou have in order to worship me? I thought for a long time, for a terrible ambition had been devouring my heart, and I replied, I have always heard of providence, yet I have never seen it or anything resembling it, which makes me think it does not exist. I want to be providence, for the greatest, the most beautiful, and the most sublime thing I know of in this world is to reward and punish. But Satan bowed his head and sighed. You are mistaken, he said. Providence does exist, but it is invisible. You have never seen anything resembling it because it works by secret springs and moves in hidden ways. All I can do for you is to make you one of the agents of Providence. I made the bargain with him. I may lose my soul because of it, but if I had to do it over again, I would do the same thing. Villefort looked at the Count in rapt amazement. You say you fear nothing but death, he asked. I didn't say I feared it. I said that it alone could stop me. What about old age? My mission will be accomplished before I'm old. And madness? I almost went mad once. And you know the axiom, non bis in idem. It's an axiom of jurisprudence and therefore falls within your range of knowledge. There are other things to fear besides death, old age, and madness, said Villefort. There is, for example, apoplexy, that thunderbolt that strikes you without destroying you, but after which everything is finished. Come to my house some day, Count, and I'll show you my father, Monsieur Noirtier de Villefort, one of the fieriest Jacobins of the French Revolution, a man who has not, perhaps like you, seen all the kingdoms of the earth, but who did help to overthrow one of the mightiest of them. Yet the rupture of a blood vessel in his brain changed all that, not in a day, not in an hour, but in a second. Monsieur de Noirtier, the former Jacobin, a former senator, a man who laughed at the guillotine, the cannon, and the dagger, a man for whom France was not only a vast chessboard. This formidable Monsieur Noirtier became that poor Monsieur Noirtier, a paralyzed old man, a mute, frozen corpse awaiting its final decomposition. What do you conclude from this, Monsieur de Villefort? I conclude that my father, led astray by his passions, has committed one or more of those wrongs which escape human justice, but not divine justice, but that God has struck him down because of this. Monte Cristo, with a smile on his lips, pushed down into the depths of his heart a roar which would have made Villefort flee in terror if he had been able to hear it. I must leave you now, Count, said Villefort, who had stood up some time before. But I leave filled with an esteem which I hope will be agreeable to you when you know me better, for I am not an ordinary man, not at all. You have already made Madame de Villefort your eternal friend. When the public prosecutor had gone, Monte Cristo said to himself, Now that my heart is full of poison, let's go seek the antidote. He struck the gong once. "I'm going to see Madam," he said to Ollie. "Have the carriage ready in half an hour."